Welcome back to the Fin to the Woods podcast, hosted by yours truly, I sound like a lame page, Finian Hackett. Welcome to another week of theatre news and all the ongoings that are going on in the theatre world. I need to learn how to speak properly when I do this introduction bit, 'cause it's always a bit naff. But here we are with another week of me chatting away about all the things that have happened. It's been quite a dull week for me theatrically. I've not seen anything, not really listened to anything new, not really watched any clips or anything. It's been a bit slow because I've had other things. I had my grad ball, which was really lovely, and got to see everyone dressed up, and it was wonderful. I had some lovely pink checkered trousers on. I loved them, and I don't know when I'm going to wear them again. I will find a time. I will. And also, I've been packing up our house, tidying our house, because we're all moving out, so sorting that all out as well, and watching a lot of Benidorm. I've watched a lot of Benidorm in the last week. I'm on series 6, and I only started it about a week ago. That's quite impressive. Also a bit sad, because clearly I don't have a life if I'm watching that many episodes of Benidorm back to back. But here we are, and I'm just going to kick off now, talking about a brand new musical all about Studio 54. So this new musical about Studio 54 and the years that it was open and one of the hottest clubs in New York is going to be a jukebox musical, which might disappoint some people, but it's going to be full of disco hits and disco tunes that kind of sum up the music of the time when Studio 54 was at its tippity top. And it's going to have a book by Chad Hodge, who adapted Holiday Inn for the stage. Sergio Trujillo is going to be directing and choreographing this in-development musical. He won a Tony for his choreography on Ain't Too Proud, the Temptations musical, and he won an Olivier for his choreography on Memphis, but he's also done the choreo for All Shook Up, Jersey Boys, On Your Feet, Leap of Faith, The Recent Days of Wine and Roses, and also Summer, the Donna Summer musical, and her music and her as a person is quite linked in with that disco period of Studio 54, so I think it's really good that he's already worked on a show with her numbers and her choreo, because I think that'll fit in really nicely with the Studio 54 vibes of the production, I'm hoping, anyway. But the one thing I am hoping happens with this is I think it will eventually go to Broadway, but it's got to go to Studio 54. Surely, if you didn't know, Studio 54 is no longer a nightclub, hasn't been for a very, very, very long time. It's now a Broadway theatre, and it's hosted a lot of productions over the last few years, and I believe the Roundabout Theatre Company run the venue, so lots of productions went there. Days of Wine and Roses was at Studio 54, and it's got to go there. Surely a musical about Studio 54 has got to play the theatre which Studio 54 now is. That just makes sense, and if they don't do that, I think they're a little bit stupid. Yet another musical has been added to the very long list of musicals opening on Broadway in this forthcoming season, and this one premiered last year to very good reviews in Chicago, and it was directed and choreographed by Jerry Mitchell, who helmed Legally Blonde, but also is doing Devil Wears Prada over here in the UK in Plymouth at the moment, which I find it hilarious that Vanessa Williams is just chilling in Plymouth. Anyway, this musical that is opening on Broadway in April next year is Boop, the Betty Boop musical, based around the very famous cartoon character. Apparently it's very good, and everyone who went to see it said it was brilliant. Nothing else has really been revealed. We don't know what theatre it's going to. We don't really know much else about it, who's going to be in it, if anyone from that Chicago company is going to transfer, and how many changes will be made. The one person that everyone really wants to stay with the production is Jasmine Amy Rogers, who played the lead role of Betty Boop in Chicago, and there was a really good clip of one of the songs in the production that they released, and it was the whole thing, and it was her recording it in a recording studio, and she was awesome, and she looked great, and I really do hope she goes with it. But as I've mentioned the last few weeks, she's one more actress to throw in that Best Actress in a Musical cesspit that it has now become. It's becoming a bit of a catfight for who's even going to get nominated, let alone win. I don't even want to think about it, really. It's stressing me out already, and it's not going to happen till the middle of next year. Anyway, that is coming to Broadway in April next year, so just at the end of that 2024-25 Tony season, which is quite interesting because the later you open, I guess it's fresher in the Tony Committee's minds when they've seen it. It just depends, or sometimes it's viewed as being too late on in the season, that it hasn't had time to develop and gather momentum behind it to get the nominations it needs. It is all very dependent, but we will see what happens with that. But I'm glad that that production is going to Broadway with an original score, which is always very exciting. However, talking of the Tony Awards, as I said last week, the Tonys always bring lots of joy to some productions with regards to how much they're making at the box office, and others will see a bit of a downfall in their profits and end up closing, and this has happened again this week after last week's announcement that the Heart of Rock and Roll will be closing. The Who's Tommy has also now set a closing date. It opened on March the 28th and it will close on July 21st after only 132 performances. I don't know if this was ever intended to be a particularly long run. It didn't give me those vibes. However, the original production ran for I think nearly 2 years on Broadway, so you'd think it had some sort of momentum behind it, but clearly it hasn't. And despite the short run, it will be going on a US tour, but not till the fall of 2025, not till the end of next year. So it's got quite a while until that was going to happen, so maybe the plan was for it to run up until then and then do a tour. But who knows? And I think it didn't do well at the Tonys. It only got one Tony nomination. I mean, there's lots of productions that don't get nominated at all, so it's brilliant. But it got one Tony nomination for Best Revival of a Musical, which went to Merrily We Roll Along. So I think it's quite interesting how much the Tonys do affect it. I don't know what the sales were like pre-Tony Awards. I think it's been selling quite well, but clearly not enough to keep that production going, which is always sad. You never want to see a production shut, but I mean 132 performances is very respectable, especially the Broadway climate at the moment isn't great. The West End theatre scene is much stronger and things run for much longer and audiences still go to see kind of anything over here in the UK. On Broadway it's quite a regular occurrence for shows to not play very long, which is always a shame, but unfortunately it's the world of theatre that we know and love. It's mean. It's very mean. Also, some more trailing news from the Tonys a couple of weeks ago. Andrew Rannells, as I said last week, announced that he would no longer be playing the role of Jim Baker in the Tammy Faye musical on Broadway, despite being previously announced to be in the production. It's now been announced that two-time Tony winner Christian Ball will be playing the role of Jim Baker in the musical, opposite two-time Olivier winner Katie Braben. And I think this is really interesting that clearly they'd already cast Christian Ball, because this was only announced a week and a half, 2 weeks ago that Andrew Rannells wasn't doing it. It makes me think that maybe they had to push this announcement and announce it earlier than they wanted to, cast-wise. I mean, it's never a bad thing to announce you have a two-time Tony winner in your cast and as one of your leads, but it's such an awkward situation. It makes me feel a bit weird, because I just feel like I would feel really awkward. And I know that Andrew Rannells and Christian Ball have done shows together before. They did falsettos together, so it just must not be a very fun situation for anyone. But very good news that he is joining the production. It's going to be the first musical at the newly renovated and raised Palace Theatre. If you didn't know, the Palace Theatre on Broadway has had this huge renovation since it closed with SpongeBob, I think, pre-COVID. They've been raising the Palace Theatre so they could fit shopping units underneath. So they've literally raised the theatre by, I think it's like an inch a day, or not even that. It's ridiculous. So the theatre has now been raised multiple feet in the air, which is insane, but it's taken years and years, but it looks beautiful. Ben Platt's just done a concert residency there to kind of open it back up again to the public, and Tammy Faye will be the first full-length musical and full-length run to be at the theatre. I think it's an interesting choice to put Tammy Faye in the Palace. It's a big theatre, and I don't know if it's going to sell. I think a revival of something big, like a Beauty and the Beast revival, would have been a lovely thing to put in there, but we shall see. This next show that I'm going to talk about was meant to have its world premiere quite a few years ago, but it never ended up happening, and that is the musical adaptation of My Best Friend's Wedding, which later this year will finally be shown to an audience. So a little bit of backstory to this. Alexandra Burke, who I saw a couple of weeks ago in Sister Act, was set to lead the UK tour of My Best Friend's Wedding in 2020. in September of 2020, but obviously this ended up being cancelled due to COVID. I think they released a recording of her singing one of the songs. It all seemed like it was still going to happen. It was delayed, and then it was cancelled indefinitely, with the hopes of it coming back at some point. Well, now it's coming back, but on the opposite side of the Atlantic, in Maine, where in September it will be directed by multi-Tony winner Kathleen Marshall. Kathleen Marshall has done lots of things on Broadway, but her most, I wouldn't say most famous, but her most, I think, well-loved production is Anything Goes, which she did on Broadway about 10-12 years ago, and then recently at the Barbican in London, and she won an Olivier for choreographing that, and the choreography in that is stunning. I saw that production 4 times, and it was worth it every time just to see those tap numbers. Chef's kiss, marvellous, I loved it. And I'm actually really excited about the music for this. Yes, it's a jukebox musical, kind of. It kind of is, kind of isn't. No, it is. I don't know why I'm pretending it's not. It's going to have the music of Burt Bacharach and Hal David, but their back catalogue, and feature lots of different songs. So they've already confirmed that I Say a Little Prayer, Walk On By, What's New Pussycat will all feature, plus a few more. I'll Never Fall in Love Again, which was written for Promises, Promises, will also, I think, feature in the musical. It was going to feature in the UK tour, so I'm assuming it will feature in this production in Maine. I am really excited about this. I don't know My Best Friend's Wedding, but I love Burt Bacharach, and his music is some of my favourite music ever written. I listen to it quite a lot, and I love Dionne Warwick and all those kind of artists who have sung his music, so I will always be excited for anything to do with his songs and Hal David's lyrics as well. I think it's a really brilliant pairing, and I hope it does really well, and I hope one day Alexandra Burke gets to do that UK tour, because it must be a bit shit to do all that promo, all those photo shoots, record things, and then it never happened. I know that happened a lot due to COVID, and we're still feeling the after effects of that, to be honest, but one day I really do hope that she gets to do it. That same venue in Maine is about to see a brand new production of A Little Night Music. So this production is going to be directed by Tony nominee Hunter Foster, who was Tony nominated for his performance as Seymour in A Little Shop of Horrors in 2004. He's going to be directing this production, and it's going to run from the 18th of July to the 17th of August. And it was announced literally this week that Kathleen Turner, the Oscar and Tony nominee, will be playing Madame Armfeldt, which is really exciting. I always find it really interesting in America that these regional productions are often just as big as UK tours or big London productions, but because America is so vast and so big, it always blows my mind slightly, but these productions are so large. Their US tours in America are just Broadway shows that tour. They tour the full production. It's crazy. And they always seem to manage to get these big stars to do these regional productions of these shows, and I think it's wonderful, and it means that you get interesting casting. And I think one of the great examples is the Muni in Missouri. They are a big outdoor theatre. It seats thousands and thousands of people, but they get some of the most brilliant people to go and do shows at the Muni. Like, they had Rue McClanahan, in the height of her Golden Girls fame, go and play Miss Hannigan in Annie. They had Donna McKechnie play the narrator in Joseph. They get such brilliant people to go and do these shows because they're just as big as Broadway productions, if not sometimes bigger. And I absolutely love that. So yeah. Right, let's come on over to the UK and to the Donmar Warehouse, who this week announced their new season of shows. They've got some great people doing plays at the venue over the forthcoming months. Adrian Brody, Tamsin Gregg, Celia Imrie, Samira Wiley, brilliant actors. But probably the most exciting part for a lot of people is the UK premiere of Natasha, Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, a very long titled musical. And this is running from December to February, so December this year to February 2025. And this is Dave Malloy's musical based in part on Tolstoy's War and Peace. And this musical has been kind of rumbling away at coming to the UK for a very long time. And I think, like I said feeling the effects of COVID still, I imagine it was somewhat delayed coming over here because it's taken quite a while, but it's finally coming over to the Donmar, much like the Donmar did with bringing Next to Normal over for the first time to the UK. They're bringing over this Tony-winning musical as well. It was the most nominated show at the Tonys in 2017 with 12 nominations, which is a lot for any show, and it won 2 for Best Lighting Design and Best Scenic Design of a Musical. Lots of people love this show. I don't know a lot about it. I know the set design, which interestingly is what it won one of its Tonys for. They completely refigured the theatre it was in to make it look, I think it was like a bar, and it was quite immersive, and they moved all the seating around, and there was really cool kind of lighting and chandelier things. It looked stunning. I don't know anything about it. I've never listened to it. I don't know the storyline. I don't know War and Peace, so I don't even know what it might be based on. But it's a good opportunity to learn about a new musical, much like Next to Normal. Didn't know a lot about it, came out loving it, and I'm sure that will be the case with this, but I know it has quite a big fan base, and I think it will do quite well, and it's only for a limited run at the Donmar, but knowing things at the Donmar, it will probably have some sort of further life, especially if it is as well received as Next to Normal has been. I imagine we'll see it going further and possibly doing quite well at the Olivier Awards. We'll have to wait and see. Probably the biggest piece of theatre news from the UK this week is the news that Disney's Hercules will be having its UK premiere at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane in the summer of next year. Now this, I think, is an interesting choice to put into Drury Lane because I'm just very intrigued by it. This musical has been in the making for quite a long time. It's had productions over in New York, outdoors in New York, and also at the Paper Mill Playhouse. It's also had its European premiere in Hamburg this year, directed and choreographed by Casey Nicholaw, who will be doing the West End production as well. So from what we've seen, it looks like this is going to be a transfer of the Hamburg production, maybe rejigged a bit for the Drury Lane, but that's kind of the vibes that it's giving, is that it's going to be that production in London. I'm just intrigued to see how well it's going to do, because currently Drury Lane has Frozen in it, and that is closing in September. Frozen is a juggernaut. It's insane. The hype behind Frozen has never really died down. I don't mean the stage musical on its own, I mean the brand of Frozen. The film came out 11 years ago, and still everyone knows Frozen. Every child loves Frozen and grows up watching Frozen. It's just insane. I don't think I've seen a film or franchise like it in a very long time. It had a very successful film sequel. It did quite well on Broadway, the stage adaptation. It's then done very well in the West End. I think it would probably tour quite well, but I don't know if that will happen. But I'm just intrigued how Hercules is going to follow on from that, because Hercules doesn't have the same following as Frozen does. It probably does amongst a different generation of people who grew up watching Hercules and as children loved that film will now be old enough to have kids of their own that they will take to see Hercules. So I think that's where a lot of the ticket sales and the hype will come from. However, children now, I don't think, really know the film or have ever really watched it. That's quite a sweeping statement. But my little brother and sister, I don't think they've ever watched Hercules or would know anything about it. I think I've only seen it once. I was talking to a few of my other friends, and a lot of them had either never seen it or had only watched it once about 10 years ago. It hasn't got the same hype around it as Frozen does. I don't know if that's because it's not a Disney princess film, but then Aladdin's done well, so your argument's there as well. But it's going to be really interesting to see how this does. It was selling very well in Hamburg, but recently those ticket sales have gone down quite a bit, and the upper circle has been closed off quite a lot in the venue, and they've got a lot of sales on for the tickets, so it isn't being a smash hit sellout run over there. So we'll have to see how well it does at Drury Lane, a very big venue to fill as well. I think it's also interesting that we have this big old gap between Frozen and Hercules. Frozen closes in September, and obviously Hercules opens in about June next year. That's a 9-month, 10-month gap? You could have a baby in that time. I just think it's really interesting they've left this big gap without announcing anything. There's been rumblings that Elf might be going to Drury Lane over Christmas. I know that they're having some concerts in over kind of September, October, November time, which would link into the theory that something's going to be on there over the Christmas period. It's then that big gap after that from probably January till June where there isn't anything there. And I don't imagine there'll be many modifications to do for Hercules. It's not going to be a big thing. They haven't got a lot of renovations to do on Drury Lane because they did that prior to Frozen opening. So I don't know. I think something's got to go in that gap, whether it's a short run of something. I've said possibly maybe Sweeney Todd might come over for a limited run. It's just a lot to do for only 6 months. And a lot to do for maybe, a 12, 14-week run. It'll be interesting to see what goes in that gap. Maybe nothing. Maybe they'll just have a dark period where they get ready for Hercules and rejig it and do other things. That might happen. That might, probably will be the most probable case, instead of quickly putting something in there. But who knows? I can't think of anything else that would go there apart from something that's already established and easy to just put in the venue, because it's a lot to put on any show, but to put a show into Drury Lane to then take it out a few months later seems a bit counterproductive. But again, as I've said about 14 times in this episode, we'll just have to wait and see. Another musical announcing its London debut this week was the Percy Jackson musical The Lightning Thief, which will be debuting in London at the Other Palace later this year. It's had previous UK productions, I think in Liverpool and a few other cities as well, usually with universities. It had a very brief Broadway run pre-COVID, which there was some controversy around the fact that it wasn't really nominated for any of those Tonys. Remember when we had that weird Tony Awards which happened in September, where only Aaron Tveit was nominated for Best Actor in a Musical, yet the Percy Jackson musical, which was the only other musical I think that had opened in that time, wasn't nominated. The lead actor wasn't nominated. It was all a bit bizarre and slightly confusing. So that's all I really link to that musical, is that weird Tony season. So hopefully it will change my thinking when it opens in London later on this year. Again, very exciting. Another musical that hasn't played London before, opening this year around the same time as Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet. However, it's not all marvellous news for London theatre this week. A new revival of Michael Lechusa's The Wild Party, which was meant to open in August, has been completely cancelled. It was running at a new venue in Hackney. I can't remember what the venue was called. It used to be a cinema and they've done lots of renovations to it, and this was going to be the inaugural production of the venue. It was going to run from August to September this year, and now it's not happening, apparently due to unforeseen circumstances beyond our control. That's what the production company said. And I just think that's shit. How shit's that? Because they'd already announced the casting, and obviously lots of people were involved. If you're opening in August, you'd be starting rehearsals fairly soon. So I just think it's really shit, and I feel really bad for everyone involved, because I really was intrigued by this. I've always been intrigued by this version of The Wild Party and what it's like. I do like the music in it. There's some wonderful songs. So I just think it's always shit when something closes and it doesn't even get off its feet. It's not even in rehearsal and it doesn't end up happening. I think that's really naff, and I feel sorry for everyone who's lost their job and is no longer involved in this production. Hopefully one day we'll see it happen, maybe in the not so distant future. Now, cast your mind back 17 years to when Enchanted, the Disney movie, which in my opinion is a masterpiece of cinema, was released. I love this film. And in this film, Idina Menzel played one of the leading characters. However, she did not sing a single note throughout that whole movie. And it's bothered people for years that she never had a song, she never got to do anything, she didn't get to show off any of her vocal talents, her Tony-winning vocal talents. But now it's come to light 17 years later that she did have a song, and that song was cut at the last minute. However, it's been leaked. So this number was called Enchanted. It was a title song, and it was sung by Idina Menzel and James Marsden as they get married and get together right at the very end of the movie. So in the actual film, this segment is kind of a lot shorter, and the song that plays over the whole montage of them getting married and Giselle setting up a shop and all that business is Ever Ever After by Carrie Underwood. So no one really sings it on screen, and there's a bit of narration and that's it. However, this is a full-blown musical number, and this video appeared on YouTube in the last few days, And in the description of the person who posted it said that the clips and the footage and all the recording has come from an anonymous source. So it's all a bit sketchy, but I love it. However, Idina Menzel then posted the whole clip on her Instagram and tagged James Marsden in it and said, "This ended up on the cutting room floor, how dare they?" Which I think was really funny. But it's a brilliant song and it's fun, and I wish it was in the final film. And maybe now that it's been leaked into the public and people will have seen it, maybe they will edit it back in to a director's cut or something of the movie. It turns 18 next year, maybe they can do it for that. I would really love to see the full version of the song, because in this clip, which you must go and watch, just search it on YouTube or search it on Google, it will come up. The beginning is sung by James Marsden and Idina Menzel, but then it cuts to the demo recording that Alan Menken did, because clearly it wasn't edited and finalised and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I thought it was a really interesting piece of lost movie musicalness that we thought we'd never see, and lots of people thought it was gone forever and didn't even know it existed until the other day, 17 years after it was filmed. Another fun little bit of info from this past week is from the Judy Garland Museum in Minnesota. They have launched a fundraising campaign to acquire a pair of the ruby slippers worn by Judy Garland in The Wizard of Oz. Now, there's a good backstory. Well, it's not good, but it's an interesting backstory to these particular slippers. I think there's only 2 or 3 other slippers from the film still going. I think the Smithsonian has one. I think the Academy Awards Museum has one. And I think the other one is owned by a private collector. And then I think there's this pair. I think there's 4 altogether. But this pair, in 2005, were on loan to the museum from the collector Michael Shaw. And they were stolen. They were stolen from the museum in 2005. And they weren't discovered until 2018. 2018. It took them that long to locate the shoes because there were no leads. No one knew where they were. And they finally found them. And only in this last year have they found the 2 people who did it. And one person still hasn't been charged. They're being charged later this year. But it's been a nearly 20 year long investigation into finding out what happened to these slippers. However, they're now back in the hands of the collector Michael Shaw, and the slippers are going on a little tour to LA and New York, then London and Tokyo, and then they're being auctioned off in December. So the Judy Garland Museum in Minnesota are trying to raise the funds to buy them and have them permanently at the museum. These slippers are reportedly worth $3.5 million. That is how much they're worth. I don't know what the starting bid will be. Probably that, if they're worth that much money. I don't really know how it all works. But isn't that an insane amount of money for a pair of shoes? I mean, a very iconic pair of shoes. If I had the money, I would also be buying them. Let's be honest here. And I think maybe every gay man in America will also be trying to buy these shoes. Even the governor of Minnesota has signed a bill to give the museum $100,000 towards getting the slippers, which I think is quite iconic. And I really hope they get them. I really hope they raise the money, because I do think things like that should be available to the public to see, and also be in a place where hopefully they have better security now, obviously, after their mishap. I hope it's all been sorted out. They've got an alarm system or something, but also somewhere where they appreciate the person who wore them and the backstory behind them. I think this pair were one of the pairs that they wore for the close-ups of when she clicks her heels, not one of the ones that she wore when she was running around down the yellow brick road. So I think they're quite bejewelled and lovely. But yes, fingers crossed to the museum in Minnesota later this year. I'll have to give you an update in December about if they've managed to raise the money, one, and then also became the highest bidder and took home those slippers. And let's talk about a very rogue production of a very well-loved musical. Hello Dolly has just had a very short run in Orlando in Florida, but starring Jodie Benson as Dolly Gallagher-Levi. Now, if you don't know who Jodie Benson is, you need to get to know. She was the original voice of Ariel in The Little Mermaid, both speaking and singing. She also voiced Barbie in the Toy Story movies, and also Thumbelina in the film Thumbelina. She's also a Tony nominee for playing Polly in the original Broadway production of Crazier for You. She's also done a few other things on Broadway and off-Broadway too. And I've always loved her. I've always loved her voice. And this production of Hello Dolly it's just a really short-lived production, but it just I loved the fact that she played it. Last year she played Rose in Gypsy somewhere, I think with her daughter as Louise, which is very iconic. But this production of Dolly looks so camp. The costumes are beautiful, they look brilliant, and her wig is lovely. And there are a few little bootleg videos of her singing the reprise of Before the Parade Passes By, I think it is. And she sounds great and she looks fabulous, and I hope there is some more bootleg footage coming out of her singing this role, because I need to hear it more than anything else. So yeah, just a little bit of tidbit of information for you there that Jodie Benson, Ariel herself, played Dolly Levi in the last couple of weeks. Let's round off the news from this week, sounds like I'm a TV presenter, with some concert news. So first off, Julian Ovenden will be doing a one-night-only concert at Cadogan... Is it Cadogan? Cadogan? I don't know. Cadogan Hall on the 14th of October this year. I love Julian Ovenden. He was brilliant in Sound of Music. I loved him in that, and I think his voice is gorgeous. He was really good in the Rodgers and Hammerstein concert as well, one of the best of the night. Him and Audra McDonald together. They didn't sing together, but those two, and Patrick Wilson and Aaron Tveit. It was a good concert, but he's so strong, and I think he deserves more love. I always think that. I think he's a brilliant performer. So you can go and see him in that concert on the 14th of October. It's just been announced that the original cast of Avenue Q, the original London cast of Avenue Q, will be reuniting for 2 concerts to celebrate the show's 18th birthday on the 10th of November at the Sondheim Theatre. I will be going to see this, and I do like Avenue Q. I think it's interesting how it hasn't really come back about for a good few years, and I think that's because this current climate, a lot of it is offensive in lots of ways, and obviously in a comical sense, but it depends how people view it and people see it. I think it's quite funny at times. I think some of it's dated. I think some of it hasn't. It's going to be interesting, but I'm glad that it's coming back for this reunion concert, because it will be brilliant to see all those original performers together once more. You have John Robbins, Julie Atherton, Simon Lipkin, Giles Terrera, Anne Harada, a really brilliant and strong cast. And yeah, I will be there. I will be going to see that, because I think it will be a brilliant night at the theatre, and who knows, it may reignite a new production of Avenue Q for today's audiences. You've then also got this concert production of A Little Night Music, not the one I spoke about earlier, a different one, which is running for 4 performances at the Lincoln Center in New York as I speak, at this very moment. And again, the cast is marvellous. Susan Graham, Cynthia Erivo, Ruthie Ann Miles, Ron Raines. It's a pretty stacked cast. And apparently, from what I've read online, it sounds beautiful and it looks lovely. And I think they've got a 50-something piece orchestra, which I think is insane. It baffles me that anyone can stay in time with each other with that many instruments around them. But maybe, again, this might lead to a Broadway revival of A Little Night Music, which has, again, been rumoured on and off for quite a while now. And I don't know if this is some sort of tryout for it. Not a tryout, but kind of putting feelers out, getting people interested. Maybe producers will watch it and go, maybe I want to produce that. Or someone might watch it and go, I want to direct that. Maybe Maria Friedman, after her success with Merrily, can helm a new revival of A Little Night Music. Who knows? But I hope it does lead to a revival, because you can never have enough Sondheim on the Broadway stage. Let's completely round off the episode with a Fin to the Woods vaguely fun fact. So this one, it sounds long-winded, but it's not. Hunter Foster, who I mentioned earlier, who's directing that production of A Little Night Music with Kathleen Turner, is Sutton Foster's brother, and their 2 shows were neck and neck at the 2002 Tonys. Thoroughly Modern Millie was up for 11 awards, and Urinetown was up for 10, and Thoroughly Modern Millie took home Best Musical, but Urinetown took home Best Score and Best Book. So I imagine their families were very, very happy that night, because overall they did pretty darn well. However, that's not the fun fact. The fun fact is, Hunter Foster's wife is Jennifer Cody, and she is the voice of Charlotte LaBeouf in The Princess and the Frog. The one who goes, Prince Naveen, that one. That is his wife. So Sutton Foster's sister-in-law is the voice of Charlotte in Princess and the Frog. Thank you once again for listening. Please continue to share with your friends and your family, and rate the podcast if you so wish. That would be really lovely. Feel free to email me at fintothewoods@gmail.com if you've got anything that you'd like to see me cover. See me, hear me cover, maybe. That's a better term. But thank you once again for listening, and I will be talking to you once more next week about all things theatre.